Hello, John. How you doing? This is our episode 38, I believe.
I
So,
think I think we did 38 last week.
did we do 38 last week? I thought it was 37.
I don't know. I
I'm
think
trying to
somewhere we're
look.
saying 38 more than once.
Okay, maybe that's true. Maybe that's true. But well, thank you for coming back onto the channel here. And the last time we talked, we were talking about Trump and the Alaska summit. So a lot has happened since then.
Yeah, baked Alaska.
So, but before we start, I want to remind the audience we are live streaming on YouTube. We're also doing a simulcast on X Spaces. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. I'll give you the mic and you will be able to ask a question. If you don't want to be voicing your question, you can type the question in the chat box and I'll read the question to John. But this is supposed to be interactive, so please ask questions. But before we begin, please make sure you click the links in the description. That will take you to John's website. You'll be able to sign up for a reading, sign up for his periodicals. We'll talk about that throughout the broadcast, what they are, but please help support John's work. Thank you again, John, for coming along to the show here and take it away.
Take it away. Well, Alaska came and went. We had that little extra week, so it's been 3 weeks since that show. And in this day and age, so many things are going so fast, the way things are quickening. I mean, in that period of time, also, I believe the BRICS and the SCO conference happened in China, and there was this huge parade that China did celebrating the victory against the Imperial Japanese Empire. And the number of leaders that came to be there in Tiananmen Square was quite historic. Um, the it's looking like the Shanghai uh, community, whatever Shanghai has always been this kind of used to be a huge area with a lot of the nations that were involved with China and former Soviet countries that are now countries on I mean, provinces of the Soviet Union, republics of the Soviet Union, Soviets. Um, and now it's looking like the BRICS is going to involve to merge the SCO, um, the and merge it with the BRICS. Uh, now, a major thing happened just this week that was just quite historic that nobody wants to touch in the West, but Pakistan made an agreement with Saudi Arabia, a defense treaty where anyone that strikes one or the other will be attacked by one or the other. So this is kind of maybe a hopeful deterrent building. This is actually giving something that was a verbal promise given to the Pakistanis over decades when Saudi Arabia put a lot of money in investment to help Pakistan. It also helped it through helping it with money to help AQ Khan make Pakistan a nuclear power and about 180 weapons. The It's always been known, I spoke about it and written about it off and on over the years, that there's this agreement, gentleman's agreement between Riyadh and Islamabad that um, Saudis were saying, well, you know, can we get something for all that we've done for you? Could we somehow make an agreement that you could, if we were in need of a nuclear weapon to have deterrence and dissuade you know who from using their nuclear weapons on us, could we at any amount just call upon you to give them? You only need to give the warheads. We have the Chinese intercontinental ballistic missiles, or they don't actually regional because their enemy is Israel, their threat. So could we then establish a nuclear deterrent using some of your bombs? And Pakistanis made that agreement verbal, and although and this agreement, this defense alliance that has just been developed by the two, has is a big step towards maybe that also being very publicly stated once to give Saudi Arabia um, a nuclear deterrent against Israel. Of course, the un, unintended consequences of such a thing would really require some kind of major diplomatic work of the world, but probably mostly will be the BRICS people who are doing it because the West seems so completely out of touch with what's going on in the global majority world that is developing before our very eyes. Where the West, which has been so dominant all over the last 500 centuries, is now, well, 500 centuries, 500 years, has, well, very rapidly losing that dominance. And the things since you and I talked were the major causes of that. First, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, now I remembered it, and the other that then was followed right after with a special summit meeting of the BRICS. It'd be the second this year, which solidified the relationship of what was the SCO being basically a security concept when it was first created around the time of when terrorism was starting to erupt, and they were just trying to, China and the Russians were trying to work together on how they would deal with terrorism. And terrorists, were also very much involved with um, would be upsetting to the Belt and Road initiative of China. Now, something that's been happening that I just discovered was happening are some remarkable construction work that's being done by the Taliban government in Afghanistan, who are now full on to be another conduit to the Belt and Road initiative. They are building dams in the Hindu Kush, the mountains around Afghanistan, and they are also going to dam some of these so that they can actually, Afghanistan may have more influence in its local community because of this. But they're also expanding Kabul by 2/3, trying to give hundreds of thousands of housing and bring jobs and things. And, it's funny. We spent 20 years there, the United States, saying we're going to rebuild and make schools and all that. And within a handful of years after we were butted out of there, now there's immense amount of reconstruction, peaceful building, infrastructure development, mining development. I mean, Afghanistan, one of the reasons why we were there for so long, but never did anything with it, is that Afghanistan is one of the main, it's like the Saudi Arabia of rare earth minerals. And it has so many things in it that because of the war and the backwardsness of it, they just couldn't. Well, that seems to be all over now. And the Taliban is, although still not officially respected as a government, is actually behaving like a responsible government with its neighbors. And so that is very interesting. The other thing that they are doing is they're rebuilding all the Buddhist statues that the Taliban in past times blew up. And as because idolatry in the extremist version of Islam, idolatry has to be destroyed. You can't have any images of gods or saints or anything like that. Of course, a very large portion of the Islamic world uh, does not completely follow that idea. The Shia will have iconic pictures of their saints, which is with the Sunni, the majority Muslims are against. But anyway, so just to bring tourism back into Afghanistan, all the mayhem that these men, when they were younger leaders of the Taliban, did, now they've had a turnaround. Old age has matured them somewhat. And now they're going to restore all the statues of Buddha, because up there in Afghanistan in the time of 500 BC, when Buddha walked the earth, and in the centuries that followed, many centuries before the 7th century AD when Islam spread to that region. Um, the southern mountains of Afghanistan were centers of Buddhist teaching. And so they're going to restore all the idols and all the things that they blew up, and I've watched them doing it. Uh, this canal that they're building across Afghanistan is remarkable. You wouldn't even know it was happening in the West. I mean, there are construction projects that are going on all around the world now that the global majority is pooling its peoples, its sovereign nations together. And by the way, the net worth of all of what 9/10 of the world's population uniting into an organization, a community of buying and selling, and just let's make a world that's stable. So we're not going to start ratting on what kind of government you have and what kind of politics you do in your country and be like all American Puritans going, no, 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 we're going to show you what you're supposed to be like. You've got to be like Americans. Well, in this whole new arrangement, people are in the world have been victims of this stuff for so long, 500 years from the West, that now they're really ready to go. Let's drop all that stuff and redefine the whole scene. I mean, the other thing that's happening is that the US dollar to survive, even Trump seems to understand this a bit, that a weaker dollar would actually be better for the United States economy. Not a collapsing dollar, but a weakened dollar might actually be a good thing. And so this lowering of the interest rates to weaken the US dollar, if it may actually be a positive move. And it's necessary because, frankly, it's if we weaken its value or not, if people aren't using the US dollar, it is weaker. And the amount of people that have turned away from the US dollar, and this is one of my more daring predictions that I've had for about 10 years or so, where I said, the US hegemonic era, the unipolar era, would end because of the dollar being left behind by the world. They just needed something to happen, something that would create an alternative. And ironically, it happened when the second Cold War began, when Obama and later Biden and Trump a little too all started sanctioning Russia. And I was going to do the article, an update on a famous thing, but I'll give you guys an early, fresh uh, notice about it. I'm, other than Charlie Kirk being my feature article, I'll talk a little bit about what my thoughts are about that and how I'm going to present it in this article. And then there's another article it's just going to be 3 articles in this one. So for all you folks who are tired of me writing 60,000 word e-magazines, I'm probably not going to do that again. So but maybe I can release them more frequently this way. Um, so the the U.S. Um, is basically losing. The dollar is going fast. People are not using it. It may be as high as 70%. China has stopped using it. India now is stopped using it. Russia was forced by it was using hundreds of billions of dollars of US dollars were in its central bank, which the greatest heist in history happened, and when this war finally erupted out of the 2014 Maidan coup that put Nazis into Ukraine, and that made a lot of Ukrainian Russians, which is a very large 40% of Ukraine's population in the eastern provinces, said we didn't vote for Nazis coming back, we fought them. And so did your grandfathers and mothers in Ukraine when you were part of the Soviet Union. You fought them too. And they murdered 9 million of Ukrainians out of the 27.5 million Soviet systems that were killed, and a good portion of the 14 million that were injured and wounded. And so uh, I won't get into the brambles with this as I usually do, but basically that caused the Cold War. And what happened was that literally in June, when Obama started his first official set of agricultural sanctions that basically banned Europe from sending any European agricultural goods to Russia, it was initially a shock for the Russians, but already the Russians were working on an idea of, you know what, we've got to be self-sufficient. And listen, Americans out there watching this show, listen good. If you want to see a way out of the problems that we are in now, we have to do a generational work of 20 years at least to do and learn from the Russians. In fact, if we could have good relationships with the Russians, which we should have after Alaska and all that, they're open to show us just how they worked with it. They had one thing in advantage that we didn't. They were not burdened with the world global currency US dollar. They used the ruble, which only Russians used. So that insulated them from all those sanctions. And proof of the pudding of that is in the very thing that's happening to the US dollar is being abandoned. It's kind of a sanction of choice that the rest of the world has made because of the toxicity and the way the dollar is being used to threaten and control people in the rest of the world, and they're sick of it. I mean, would you Americans like that to happen to you? You may have to actually experience it now if some people want to control you the way you've been trying to control and push around others. And so it's a hard lesson for us, but we could grow up from this. I mean, I would say, you know, the proof of what I'm saying is that the America's biggest problem is it has a global currency. It has depended upon deficit spending and throwing all of its debt burden through bonds on everybody that uses the dollar. So we haven't been paying our debts because, in a strange way, all our customers and allies have been paying it for us, but it's not taking down our higher inflation at all. Um, so, the Russians in 2014, fortunately, it wasn't the repeat of 1914 and World War One. It could have been, but it was a big change. And the big change was the Russians said, well, we have to play on our strengths and not play in our weaknesses and our exposed. We have this ruble that their sanctions aren't going to touch. So let's build our own dairy farms. Let's expand our own vast potentials for agriculture. We are already in our 11 time zones. We have enough property, thank you very much. We don't want to invade Europe or China or anything like that, thank you very much, because they are the largest country on the world. 1/6 of the Earth's surface is Russia, and it is the Saudi Arabia of resource materials, of minerals, of things. I mean, they've got so many things they can play with. They haven't even tried to even look at the vast potentials they have in rare earths, which they do have. And so, and I'm seeing a pattern here with the Russian government is in the go-betweens between Trump and Putin. Trump is trying to create a relationship again above and beyond what's going on in the world. Um, and in those talks, he's been often talking about, well, we would be open if to negotiate with you business deals on a lot of things that you need, like the rare earths. If you don't want to go through China, you can go through us, and the and other things. There's even some oil deals that Russia would also like to contribute more into a partnership in the Arctic, which is the great transport and resource source rich zone of the next big gold rush, if you will, of all different things needed. in our modern world. And so there's a lot more to these talks than Zelensky the clown and his neo-Nazi handlers and his impossible demands that he doesn't start talking unless Russia literally gives everything back first, including Crimea. I mean, he's a comic. If he said that to me, I'd say, "You're joking, aren't you? You must be joking." So, so I might start writing about how Russia came out of the crash of the Soviet Union and the attempt to break it up by European and American carpetbaggers in the 1990s. That, basically, um, it was a terrible decade. Millions of people died from neglect in Russia, maybe 10, 20 million. It was terrible. Almost all the old people that were on the dole, they privatized it, there was no more money, and they either starved to death, or if the mafia, if they were holding on to properties that they wanted to live in because that's where they lived, the mafia would take in people and bump them off. The mafia of the oligarchs. Well, the oligarchs are not in Russia anymore, and the ones that are basically are following what Putin asked them to do. Look, you can be in business, that's fine. A country can profit from that. Stay out of politics. Don't go into politics. But we're not going to get you for all of that, but stop manipulating the politics. And the few who didn't, they they fooled around and found out, as I've cleaned up the famous phrase. you know, so a lot of those left into Britain and the United States and all, and then and even they want to come back because when the sanctions and all the Russia phobia came up, they were also pariahs. It wasn't just conductors and beautiful and ballerinas and Olympian sports people from Russia. It was also a lot of the oligarchs lost their properties. The guy that I think owned Manchester United or one of the big soccer teams, they they all want to come back now because the West doesn't love them anymore. And so so very important for America to begin. There's a lot of work for every American to do. And if we stop playing global cop that nobody paid for, or if they did, they're not paying for it now. Um, we have immense resources. We are also a continental nation and if we have a good relationship with our neighbors in the north and the south, in Mexico and Canada, we can create a community of North America, that of sovereign nations, and pool our resources to rebuild and improve this country, to fix the 80,000 bridges that are about to collapse, to do what China and Russia and other places have done, replace a lot of the automobiles with rail, fast rails, things like that. That is one way then you go in your car for recreation, not to work every day. There are so many things that would keep every American employed. But you know what the real devastation that we're going to have to confront is we haven't just lost factories, we've lost the skills, the people who knew how to make things. We have neglected them. We have we had this silly idea that the Chinese would always be our sweatshops and our factory laborers, and we could just all live. I mean, even President Clinton believed this BS. And um, and what we did is we have to re-educate ourselves on how to run businesses. Maybe we should invite some of the great successful Russian businessmen and Chinese businessmen to come to our country and re-educate us, the US, in how to build things. The other thing too is that Russia has an amazing education system. It is a very literate country. I even watch street cleaners know more about world history and news than even presidents of the United States, like the one we currently have. I don't think he's ever read the Constitution. Because how can he make all these? How can he run his government like he is, like a dictator, like a? Oh well, I did say before he was ever a president, I said looking at his chart that he would probably make a better Roman Caesar, a Roman dictator, than a president, and unfortunately that prediction is coming true. I mean, for all the people who haven't read it yet, I put out all the good and bad potentials of Trump in that book, Trump for President, Astrological Predictions. I wanted, and I did something that was quite radical then, is that I was fair. I didn't pull any punches on things that were really potentially bad things in his chart, all the way to the point of being Greg Stilson of the Dead Zone, the Stephen King novel and movie. And so no one can say you were just hedging yourself. You're going this way. No, what I do is I give you all the options, all the potentials. And what really it is about which were the good options or the bad options that I recorded that happened. And, there was, unfortunately, as much as a lot of us were hopeful that the good sides, the angels in his astrology of better nature would play out, it's looking right now like the age and maybe mental cognitive issues uh, and health issues are on top of that, are giving us the bad angel of our lower natures in his astrology. And so I've been pulling out more and more of those quotes from that book ever since. This book was written in 2015, in the autumn of 2015, even several months before the primaries that it predicted were started. And then his presidency, which I predicted Hillary Clinton would win the popular vote, and in my view, that would kind of technically make her the president, but he had the electoral college vote because of his astrology being so amazing. So, he got through. So it was a strange prediction. In both cases, it was right. The two options both happened. Hillary won the popular vote, and he won the vote that matters, the electoral college. He did upset that victory. I know it's some people who want everything binary in their thinking I'm hedging. I'm not. I'm always giving you the options, good, bad, and sometimes transcendental. So, so we need to learn. Uh, I think I'd like in more of my Hogue prophecy bulletins, especially after October, if we're still here, uh, to be more about how America will not make itself great again, but simply make itself American again. No empire, no Roman American Empire stuff, none of this. Just, we used to be a country who just, well, like any other country, we had our scene, our locale, and we're psychologically as a nation not naturally predisposed to be imperial. It just goes against this constitutional nation's very nature. It's such a perversion that by the burden of victory and superpowerdom at the end of World War II and the suddenly unexpected rise of a new Cold War, we basically, if you look at all the other big wars the United States has been in from the Civil War on, we usually started it with hardly any armies and anything around. And then because of we built more greater industrial base, we very rapidly industrialized. In fact, the South lost the Civil War, not because it didn't have great armies, in fact, had most of the officer corps of the Federal Army went south because they were from the South. The southern states have a tradition of producing many great soldiers and martial figures and commanders and officers, and to this day. But the North had 25 states, millions more people, many more railroads and logistics and factories. And the South didn't. So they were doomed to lose. Um, so this country uh, has lost its industrial base. It's deindustrialized. So we are going to have to make the difficult path towards that and changing that. But if we go back home, we take ourselves out of the burden of all those 800 bases we have all over the planet. And if we start just coming home and all those young men and women who are getting ready for war, or young men and women who could be waging a war against our Rust Belt, rebuilding the country, that the Roman centurions and the Roman army, the legions, um, although they fought in lots of wars, especially up to the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, when unfortunately the Senate could not, Senate and Republican and Democratic political systems, Republic being one that has a parliament or a Congress and something, and no monarch, but the they can't sustain themselves if they get too large. And that's the big temptation is Rome by the time it was by the final 150 years BC that was left to Rome was getting too big. It defeated Carthage and took the vast swaths of Carthage. It incorporated Egypt after Antony and Cleopatra did their thing into the Roman Empire. It was a republic, but it was becoming too large to be governed by democracy. And so there were, I think, three triumvir civil wars over this matter. It's triggered by Julius Caesar actually stepping up and saying, no, we need a dictator, and I'm it. And the Senate would be there, but just more symbolic. Um, and that caused he crossed the Rubicon River with the Roman legions, which no Roman general was ever supposed to do, because that's what Sulla did and Gaius Marius in the social wars and did in centuries past. And in a way, yes, there are aspects about totalitarian ruling that are very clean and efficient at high price to one's freedoms. And this very subject is a subject that the Chinese are trying to find a harmony and a balance with, because they are fully aware. I mean, these people survived the Cultural Revolution of Mao. They're fully aware of how things can go terribly wrong if you're trying to force these experiments. And like Mao, I think Mao was also losing his marbles in the 1960s. He was starting to get senile, and of course he had all this power. So one day he had this great brain fart where he said, you know what, we can match the production of steel by the United States if we create a little furnace in every peasant's backyard. And then they'll make steel. Little furnaces. He had this idea. So they built furnaces all across China, not well made, not making very good quality, lots of errors and cracks and holes because they're farmers. And what they did is it was so pushed so much that agriculture was not the vast agrarian country that China must be. All its farmers were too busy making steel that was absolutely a waste of time. And then there came a famine from food shortages that killed 20 million people from famine in China in the mid 60s, 1960. And then what did Mao do after that? He had the Cultural Revolution. He was all classes with the people with knowledge were at fault for it. So all the teachers and everybody and all the city people had to go out and work like farmers. And I have some friends who grew up in all of that, and they told me some amazing stories about it, very traumatic. And again, it was another, Mao was turning Red China into a Jim Jones cult group. It's like the little red books and all. And it was really kind of crazy. And then that revolutionary thing failed. But what really put cold water on it was that by the late 60s, China's relationship with the Soviet Union was so bad. And the Soviet Union was so concerned in 1965 when China lit off a nuclear bomb that I've said before, they had only a few years to maybe surgically destroy enough of China's industry and nuclear industry that they could never create missiles to hit targets in Russia. So there was a 2-to-1 chance in 1969 that China was going to be surgically reduced by a thermonuclear war of choice of the Soviet Union. It was so close. Actually, Jean Dixon foresaw that. She was the famous prophetess that in writing in, I think, Parade magazine, she in 1952, and I've seen the article, she made a prediction that Eisenhower would be a 2-term president, but then there would come a young Democrat president in 1960, and she also said there was a threat of assassination, and she actually, when it came close to November of 1963, because she was friends with the Kennedys, she was trying to see them and say, "Don't go to Dallas. Don't go to Dallas." And I had a story, I think in Nostradamus, The Complete Prophecies, I had a story from witnesses, her friends. They were at a luncheon in Washington, D.C., and she was really beside herself. And I know how this feels because I sometimes, when things are big about to happen, it kind of drives me a little crazy. It's like something's coming, I'm feeling it and I can't stop it. And so she was getting beside herself, composed, but not like, and then, and then she suddenly said, "No, no, don't call anymore. It's over." And then not long after that, they heard that he had been shot in Dallas that day. So, um, the the future of the United States requires all of us, especially the young, because it's your future. I'm in my 70th year. I've maybe got less than 2 decades, maybe a little more left in this amazing life that I've had. But your lives are just beginning. And you might have to consider uh, that it's more important to build factories and work them than to go to college to learn things that a country that had an industrial base before could give you the luxury of being in. I know a lot of young men and women that I know are going nowhere with their college, they except to have a huge life sapping debt. But, the things that they were not very practical about the things that they wanted to learn. I mean, mainly the part of the problem is that if we're going to get ourselves out of this, and if you want what used to be called a white collar job, there are certain jobs that will be desperately needed, and that is engineers, scientists, you know, people who learn how to construct buildings and infrastructure. Um, we will need that. We will need people that will reinitiate and resurrect our minds, our factories. And I can tell you a place where that's happened, of course, in China. But what you don't know, because you think China is a gas station, it's happened in Russia. And they, in that period of the terrible time of the 90s, it took them 20 years to rebuild their nation. And then after the 2014 hit of a new Cold War of sanctions and stuff on them, they went even deeper into preparing for the day that someday the West would just do some. Everybody keeps criticizing Putin that he did not attack the Nazis in Ukraine back in 2014. Even most Russians do this. And I have to explain to them, as I have to explain to all of you guys, is if Putin had attacked Ukraine, preempted what they were doing, like he did in February of 2022, back in February of 2014, Obama would have unleashed with the EU when it was strong and the US dollar was a lot stronger. They would have initiated all these, I don't know how many sanctions that they threw at Russia. 11 major sanction regiments since 2022. And they would have overthrown the political regime and the government in Russia. And Russia might have broken up as they secretly desired it would. But these Ursula von der Leyen and all these other people who run the EU and all, and she's running around saying, I tell you that the Russian economy is in tatters, I tell you. They're having to dig out chips from their from their ice boxes and stuff like that to run high-tech weaponry. All complete fantasy. And so that is, the Russians saw it coming and they all, as a nation, rebuilt their nation. So I think if we're still here after October, which I hope we are, um, I think I would like to talk more in my future articles and future shows about how we can, how what I've learned about how the Russians rebuilt themselves is something we can learn because in a way they are, as a civilization, closer to us than the Chinese civilization. I'm not saying the Chinese civilization is something alien to us. In fact, I love Asia myself, but I'm just being practical here. I think I think if we were friends with Russia, you would find what I have found, that Russian people are very similar to us, but kind of the way we were when we were responsible, when we were literate, when we had an industrial base and didn't give it away, before we gave it away for the profit of very few of our own oligarchs, like Mitt Romney. He made steel. He made millions selling our industries away to China. And none of you Americans have any right to complain about the Chinese taking it. They weren't even looking for it. It was just given to them. Frankly, you're in a boat right now when you might want to act like the Chinese and let somebody give you industry again, like you used to have. This is the difficult process that we're going to be in. If we're lucky, it'll only be 20 years, a generation. But I tell you, Russia today is in a remarkable recovery, revitalization. In its entire long history, Russia has never been richer than it is now and more politically stable than it is now. And if you would just go online and just, I mean, one of the best things to do, maybe I'll make a list of vloggers that I know from all across Russia. And you don't have to believe or disbelieve them. But I can give you the list of these people, and a lot of them don't like Putin, a lot of them love him. It's like any other country. And you will be, I think, I was amazed to see to what extent, because I've grown up with the crumbling Soviet Union, and crumbling Moscow, and crumbling Gorky, and all the cities looking like they're all not enough paint on the buildings and all that real Eastern European stuff. It's not like that anymore. It's remarkable. I mean, Moscow is the city of the world now. It's that much improved. It's breathtaking what they have done. But don't believe me. Go to any video on YouTube where I said nightlife, walking the streets of Moscow in the summer, walking the streets of Moscow in the winter, you know, and there's a lot of vloggers out there. All they do is they just run their vlog and they're just walking down with all the people, just kind of recording what everybody's doing. And Gorky Park and other places, and the city's clean, everything's painted, the gardens are beautiful, well kept. You never see a vagrant. You don't see a bunch of people in tents like in Los Angeles living on the streets. And you don't see I've heard this a lot from Americans that I know living there, expecting to see police everywhere, like it's North Korea or something. No, you hardly see a cop on the streets of Moscow. Um, Women in Moscow are polled, they feel that they're safe at all hours, at night or day, in the streets of Moscow. And the strange thing is, if some rare event happens where somebody's causing any problems, like harassing a woman or something like that, suddenly all these guys, they're just citizens, say, "Hey, what are you doing?" You know, they police themselves in that regard, when stuff like that happens. We do the thing, understandably, where we just pretend it's not happening. We look away unless it's our face getting hit in these cities and streets. I mean, if you go on X and look at all the footage of what's going on in our cities, and there's a lot of people are on X in Russia. They would, if it was going on in Russian cities, you'd see it on X. It's not happening. So anyway, do we have any questions?
We have three.
Oh,
So
good.
you
I
remember
apologize for being so long-winded, but
you remember Amber? She asked questions
yes,
previous.
yes. Hi, Amber.
So her first question is, John, what is your thoughts on the far right and the radical left and woke issues?
Well, this is actually, Amber, a good segue to that because it's really a theme that I'm looking at in the feature article that's going to open up my next Hogue Prophecy Bulletin report, that's going to be around the end of September, so in just a week or so. And the first thing that happened, I've been, all my life, I've been fascinated by John Brown, the great preacher who ended up taking Harper's Ferry in 1859 with his sons, and he was an abolitionist, but he was like Jeremiah the prophet. He was like a warrior prophet. I mean, he even had the long beard and the waving hair, and he was the epitome of a biblical prophet, like repent, but he had a gun, American biblical prophet, and and so he took action, and he wanted to start a insurrection in the southern states and arm all the black slaves to free themselves. And so it was quite a daring, impossible thing, but he went all the way, and his sons were with him, and they ended up locking themselves up in the armory of Harper's Ferry. And a detachment of the United States federal forces came to uh, suppress this rebellion, and his sons were killed, I think, but he was wounded and survived and ended up being hung publicly, with making a few prophecies before they did it. And the irony is the commander of that Union detachment was General Robert E. Lee, from Virginia, who, when President Lincoln 2 years later or so became president of the United States and it was developing into a civil war between the North and the South, he brought Robert E. Lee, who was still important. He was a commandant of West Point at one point. He was considered the best general the Union had. And uh, Lincoln sat him down and said, if we go into an insurrection, will you lead the Union armies? And it's ironic that Alexandria, Virginia was on the Virginia side of the Potomac River, and on the hills overlooking the capital, Lee had a plantation on the Virginia side. And he would look over there often, and he really thought we should have, the worst thing we did was to keep the slavery thing. It's not right. And he was, you know, would have liked a peaceful resolution of the end of slavery. But then Lincoln made a fiery speech, a big mistake, because at that time the South was only some of the deep South states and was not Virginia and Tennessee. And when he made this speech, it was a mistake. All the rest of the states, including Lee's home state of Virginia, joined the Confederacy. And when he asked him to run to defeat the insurrection was after that happened. And Lee said, I can't fight against my own people. I'm a Virginian. These are my people. You see, back then, people used to say the United States are. The Civil War and over 1 million killed and many more injured in 4 years was all fought to change a verb, a linking verb from are to is. The United States is. So federal control against states' rights. So in those days, you weren't just fighting for your Confederacy, because the Confederacy is actually a bunch of independent states. It was the idea, the more extreme version of states' rights is that the states have a little more right than the federal government. And I am telling you, I'm predicting this, it's coming. I've seen it coming for over 20 years, is that is going to be replaced by are, hopefully peacefully, or not, which gets me back to John Brown. I opened up this guy named Stuart Smith, did this incredible, almost kind of impressionistic painting of, it's very famous. If probably most of you have had any contact with any illustrations of John Brown, it's a shot where he's got the Bible stretched out in one hand and a gun in the other, and he's standing there, legs open, and there's a tornado in the background, and he's like on prophetic fire, just it's an amazing thing. And I stumbled upon it, and I went, I'm going to use the painting in the opening of my next Hogue Prophecy Bulletin. And it immediately clicked into me that this whole situation that's happened with Charlie Kirk is a tale of two American apostles of Christianity that became martyrs. Now we know when John Brown did it violently, he was the violent one, and he died a martyr in the hearts of a lot of people in the North. And it made a big step towards the militancy of the North because of the slavery thing to go to war. So he launched a civil war of flames, a hot civil war. But I'm wondering if the martyrdom of Charlie Kirk is another John Brown story where his death will initiate a cold civil war that could go hot later. Now, back in 1998, there's a book actually that I'm going to quote more from as time goes by. It's a book I wrote, I think, I published it in 2018. And it's called Beyond Alt Left and Alt Right, a Community of Americans. And upon its very simple cover for me, it has two crisscrossed American flags, so in white field, off-white field, surrounded by a red band at the edge of the book. On the one side is, I've tinted one of the American flags blue, and on the other side, red. We had the blue and the gray fighting in the hot Civil War. We've already had the blue and the red in a cold political, economic, social Civil War. And I said it would begin back in 1998 during the midterm elections, when I noticed that the partisanship of this whole divide and conquer of the two-party system was just emerging into the thing that's gone way beyond what was back then. But I start the book with a quote because I stumbled upon it. I forgot I had made, as I forget most of my predictions. That's why I have them recorded so that I go back and see if I said anything about it. And often I did. And the I said, if this partisanship continues to deepen to divide this nation, we will be in a civil war by 2020. What happened in 2020 in this cold civil war? The 2020 election, which was a fraud. I saw it was a fraud before it happened. I didn't vote for Trump or Biden. I actually, as a protest vote, signed in Tulsi Gabbard. It's the only time I've ever done a sign in, and I said, I want her for president. um, it's interesting because she's also found herself in her political life trying to balance blue and red. And and she's kind of in the doghouse now in Trump's administration because like all the people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Musk, it was kind of reconciled with Trump. These people and Charlie Kirk were major enablers and apostles for his second term. I mean, Charlie Kirk got all the young people. Most of the Democrat Party youth voted for Trump because they were expecting him to get us out of these wars, these forever wars, and that he would actually do something with Musk's Doge and get us out of all this corrupted spending. I mean, the despite the fact of how much noise they make, the woke side of the Democratic Party is very small compared to the quiet people of the Democratic Party and the young. And Charlie Kirk carried over the youth vote. Charlie Kirk also, because of a lot of donations he got to his nonprofit, and which he started since he was like a teenager. And then all these years since, now he died just before his 32nd birthday, which I think would be in October 20th, in October 12th, I think. So he's a Libra trying to find a balance between two opposing views. Well, anyway, I start this article talking about John Brown and what happened to him. And then I go into Charlie Kirk and then what happened to him. I don't dwell a lot about the who shot who and how was he shot stuff, although I will in a moment talk about some things that may transpire. I will have to cover the difficult but really necessary subject of whether he was killed by Mossad or not, because there was a lot in the last 8 weeks before he was killed. There was a lot of pressure put upon him by all the donors, the Zionist donors, and major Zionist supporters, billionaires and all. And they, to the point where just a few days before he was shot, he was literally invited to come to a influencers meeting with a very pro-Zionist American billionaire who also had associations with Epstein. And he was threatened in that. He pretends that didn't happen, but there's too many people who were there are leaking out. Max Blumenthal of the Gray Zone. If you want to really see some great reporting from this, he's a left leaning, he's not a Republican, he's a left leaning journalist. Him and his wife Anya Parenpil, another really great journalist. Go read The Gray Zone, and you will find a very source-based look at all of these things that are going on right now about what happened to Kirk, what may have happened, and how possibly the Israeli, well, the Zionists, I make a distinction between Israel and Zionists. As far as I'm concerned, the distinction is similar as saying German people and Nazis. German people, I don't hate German people, but I don't support Nazis. I don't hate Israeli people or Jewish people. I'm part Jewish myself, but I cannot abide the Zionists that were about to destroy Israel and maybe take a lot of the world with them. It's so, and then they were very freaked out because Charlie Kirk was he was having a change of heart. He was starting to see the footage of what's going on in Palestine and how the people are being massacred. And one of the second article after this will run that home further. Now, there are people I do in my second article look at all the ways I evolved over the last several years, my view about how many people in Gaza are really being killed. And now, I was saying on this show and others that I would say now it's around 700,000. I've been saying this on this show for off and on for over a year. And a study has come out that is estimated that it is 680,000, just 20,000 off my number. And I go at length with links to the report of these two professors looking at populations, kind of doing what the Lancet did in July of this year in their report that, this idea of 50,000 dead is it's just not reality. Now, they said then it might have been at least 189,000, 200,000. That was when I started saying, no, back then it was 300,000. Now, in the middle of the summer of last year, and by the end of last year, I predicted it would be around six. That's what I was feeling, 600,000. So, I won't go into length about that, but that I would definitely, when you look at my articles, the second article, I will have all the links to that, and you can do your own research. My job is to provide, whenever I can, the other side of the story that mainstream media is loath, especially if it's manipulated by Zionist influences, which, unfortunately, I'll say it again, our government is not our own anymore. It's been bought by Zionists, and it is doing in America. It's not America first. It's Israel first. And many, many Democrat youth and many Republicans, even Marjorie Taylor Greene has seen the light about this, is saying, this is not what MAGA is about. This is not what MAGA is about. MAGA is about you, Donald Trump, promising to open the Epstein files like you would do the Kennedy files. We're not sitting here like stand by your man idiots anymore. I used to talk about, a lot of people in the MAGA movement. There's, the Democrats go crazy in Trump derangement syndrome. They hate him beyond any reasonable level. And then but his MAGA people for a long, long time, it was like, stand by your man. You'll always stand by your man no matter what he does, blind to realities. That's no longer the MAGA movement in Trump 2.1. That's 1.0. And of course, there's going to be, I imagine, a third or so of the MAGAs that will just be going, like that. That's fine. We're free to be stupid as well as be intelligent. The in this country, and so too bad the stupids are running it. But okay, the so MAGA is maturing beyond the messianic political leader syndrome, which was Trump. It's now a movement that I think will survive Trump and is already showing signs of it. And also Trump has when 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 people who love him were telling him, "Hey, this is not what you promised." He was rude. He said, "Oh, shut up. I don't care. I don't need you people anymore." He got into his petulant 8-year-old child. I used to talk about how there was that other child, which is still there, that child that would say innocent things that changed everything because they were so true. Well, that child has been put in a bottle somewhere, and the child that he's bringing out now is not that child, but a brat. It's this bratish 8-year-old who's just an insufferable bully wimp. Unfortunately, those two aspects were in Trump, but now that one's out. So what's happening to the right, Amber, is the right is maturing. And a lot of people that were seeking some kind of world and life in the Democratic Party um, are might as well be directors and producers working for Walt Disney. You gotta do Snow Brown rather than Snow White, or you're not going to work here anymore. It's sort of like all this wokeism, all this uh, gender bending stuff is just. I mean, if you want to do that on your own, make your own studio. But a studio that's made its profit on kind of being in the middle of the American world, and that's where it made its billions. Well, it's Disney is going down the tubes because it's listening to a very vocal, influential, but a very small cadre of the American TV and movie and Netflix and whatever you have audience. And and it's destroying these things. Even Disney was in big trouble because of Charlie Kirk changing his ways. That was also because they were doing something with him. So Disney just can't get it right because they got to drop the wrong at the very core. Drop the woke. Let woke people have a right to do what they do, but that's a corporation. They can choose if they're smart about their corporation thriving and all the millions of people that work for them and making good things. I mean, I grew up with Disney. Um, it's not you're going bust by going stupid. So going, um, it's the Bud Light effect. A cross-dressing trans icon for Bud beer is going totally against the demographic. I mean, I would have to say again, are you joking? Are you just playing a joke on us today? You really are serious? So the I think the right I think is maturing. Not of course the rhinos. They're not. They can't. The rhinos are they're the they're the Republican version of woke. you know, they're walked. They're not they're holding on to an old system, neoconservative and all that. It's just not. It has no future, as does wokeism. It has no future. It's just an aberration, and that's probably going to upset some people. But um, I'm not stopping you from being woke. I'm just telling you that I don't agree with it, and that gets me to another subject. The article is also going to talk about things that Charlie Kirk did that might have got him in the position, even if it wasn't some Zionist government doing it, that got him killed. And I look at I take a couple examples. One, and he's 32, and I can remember when I was 32 and a good debater. Um, I wouldn't do some things now at 70 that that he's doing. Case in point. Now there was this nervous kid, um, a undergraduate, and he's kind of nervous to be in front of Charlie Kirk, but Charlie was always very open, and he's sitting there, and he said, well, he was wanting to just drill him with a bunch of expletives and stuff like that. So, okay. Well, do you want to have a talk with me? Can we have a discussion? Said Kirk, and I said, okay, well, come close, and here's the mic, and let's have a discussion. So, what do you want to talk about? And then the guy kind of went back into robot mode where he just saying, I hate you. I think you're a horrible person. I think you're, and all of this, and I hate the way you're a racist and all this. Suddenly Kirk said, uh, can you tell me anything I've said where I was racist? And of course the kid was all emotion, and why are you in college, maybe the college teachers aren't teaching you how to critically think anymore. I mean, your parents are blowing all this money, and you didn't even come to this debate with some bullets of truth to fire at, not bad analogy, not literal bullets to fire at him. And so I thought, okay, if I were in the podium getting up there, I would have said this to him. So this is kind of what I've said. It's kind of a long question. And I said, if Einstein is correct, Albert Einstein, that the only difference between genius and mediocrity is that genius knows its limits. What are your limits, Mr. Kirk? What are your limits in this situation with this guy that you just talked with? Um, you know, I mean, it's very predictable where this is going. He's all you're going to do is make him feel stupid because he is acting stupid, and because on some level, he has enough truth to know that makes him even more angry because he's been shown up to be a fool. I know I've been in that position. I'm speaking from experience. Like my brother one time when he was a really big Jesus freak in the early 70s, he asked me a question. He said, John, are you happy? And I kind of went, am I happy? I was thinking, shit, I haven't even asked myself that question. And so I was like getting angry. Well, I was getting angry, It was like, I felt stupid. I felt like I never asked myself that question. It's a pretty important question, isn't it? In the pursuit of happiness that's in the Bill of Rights or the Declaration of Independence. Um, and so I was grumpy and got pissed. And um, that I was triggered by the fact that he might have known about happiness, but I could say he wasn't really happy either. But I wasn't even there yet. I wasn't even thinking of happy, good or bad. I felt so stupid because I was stupid. And so I used to be able to take people apart, just as Charlie Kirk was taking them apart. And I was doing it nicely and all, but um, if you're taking part, and then I add to the question, if you're taking apart mediocrities who know no limits, what's going to happen to you? Maybe what just did happen to you. Some kid who got pissed off enough, a mediocrity with no limits, like the assassin, and shot you dead. Made your wife a widow, your young children without a father. So that's in the book. That's in the article.
So let me just expand on that.
Hmm.
Let's assume that Kirk was still alive and we project out 10, 15 years. Do you think he would have been as belligerent
No,
during?
I don't think at all because I was him,
So
and
when,
I got a lot. I grew from it. I also did it because I must have had 30,000 correspondences from people on the left and the right, and I was compelled to respond to them. And people would say, "Why? You know where this is all going?" He says, "I'm learning how to talk. I'm doing this so that I will learn how to respond in a more effective way." therefore be of some help rather than be a cause of reaction. So I literally, all the people who would write me their hate mail and left and right, I would, and I knew what it was for me to learn something. And the day that I learned was many years ago. I stopped answering those letters, but I went right into the well of all those angry letters, and and I had to, I finally found a way to speak. And it can be equally devastating, but it has a different way of doing it. Um, and also, I have some quotes of Charlie Kirk, um, The Passions of a Young Man, where he had this, and I will be quoting these because I found them on X. After the, I mean, after the day of the assassination, I went deep into the night trying to find things, trying to look at what's going on, try to get a feel for him because I didn't know much about him. And I had to really do a crash course and catch up to what this was all about because this is very significant. Say John Brown's body lies a molding in the grave, as the song goes, and it could lead to civil war between the red and blue America. And it'll be a much more disorganized civil war. I go into that also. The demographics of the potential civil war that we would have would be much more, not so similar to the ordered whole North versus the whole South, who could actually fight a set piece civil war with standing armies and navies and all of that. No, this is going to be more like what I've become so intimate in my lifetime study of Nostradamus is the motivation of a coming set of civil wars that made him risk writing out in public his history of the future because he saw it coming. And I show how I document this in my updates of this book that was his motivation. And it was very risky because the Roman Inquisition was at work in Paris, and if he had not had the powerful friendship and patronage of Catherine de' Medici, Queen of France, who was secretly an occultist, she used to have a cross with Jesus Christ on the front of her cross. And when she went with her maidens into their secret rites and stuff, she flipped the cross over and had the naked sun god. So I bet you got to watch that you got your cross flipped over the right way. If it just moved in the public. But um, anyway, she uh, the wars of religion, they were called. There were 9 French civil wars. They began in 1562. Nostradamus unfortunately lived to see his prophecy fulfilled anyway. That the death of a king in the jousting accident would cause the children not to be old enough to rule, and then there would be a struggle between the petty royal houses and the great royal houses, petty like de Guise, Lorraine, and the great royal houses of the Bourbon and the Valois king, the House Valois, and and it there were 9 of them. They raged from off and on from 1562 all the way almost to the next century in 1598. 2.5 million people were killed mostly through massacres and counter massacres. The famous St. Bartholomew Day massacre was one of the worst of them in Paris. It was also like a mafia war between 2 families. The although the Catholics had a vast majority of the French population, they were a minority in the princely caste. The Huguenots had 2/3 of the princely caste, but a small group of believers. So it became a war of assassination and counter-assassination. Almost everybody at the beginning of it, except for Henry of Navarre, who became Henry IV of France because he was the last one standing. All the Guise, except for the Duke of Mayenne, all the of his family, all the House Valois, all 4 of the sons, they all, one way or another, the bloodline ended, and then he was the last one standing. And then he said, well, if to stop this war, if I can stop these wars from just becoming a Catholic again, Paris is well worth a mass, he said. And so that's ended these wars back, way, way back, 40 years, 40 years of it. And it was not a hegemonious group. The South wasn't all Protestant and the Catholics were not all in the North. It was scattered all across the kingdom, just like here. So I may be, it's interesting that I'm finishing in the next several years this massive Nostradamus project, which will truly be the complete prophecies. And the wars of religion come up so much, and it might be something worth reading to prevent it from happening here, our version of that, or to be aware of how the blow looks if it does happen. So, so I found some things that he had said that, there's things I said to people when I was, a little more acerbic in my responses that I wouldn't do now. I wouldn't pull out my double Scorpio, double stingers, as Scorpios can really do. I hope I'm grown a little wiser, but I worked hard to become wiser in these things. I think Charlie Kirk would absolutely, he's already showing signs of it. But I mean, he in the fire of his Christian prophetic, kind of quality, he once made a statement. He said, I don't want Muslim terrorists to be, and I fortunately will quote it right, so forgive me if I quote a little wrong here, but the gist of it, what I heard was, and it will be actually what he said, and with the link to it, him saying it, a few years back, he said, I want a country where, with my Christian values, where I can go to church and my family can go to church and worship what we wish to worship. I'd like to be able to send my kids to school and not have them told to disrespect their parents' religion or all that. I'd like everybody to have work, and have, basically the irony is, as somebody pointed out, when I look at what some people said about what he said, ironically, and this I think he would have learned, he just listed all the things that Muslim Americans want, because Muslims are just as conservative as Christians about these basic things: having a good home, not having crime in the streets, have a safe community, you know. Muslims are, that's exactly what Muslims want too. So there's a bridge. There's a bridge. Um, but what he said is, he rose up in his early 30s passion. He was saying, and I don't want this to happen. I don't want these terrorists to happen. I don't want to have to hear some muezzin saying his prayers in earshot of my neighborhood. Oops. That's hate speech. That's what the kid said. Well, what'd you say when you said you don't want the mosque near your place? Isn't that hateful? Isn't that kind of a hateful thing to say? I mean, we have mosques all over the United States. Are you saying, I mean, granted, they're not going to broadcast. I don't know of any mosque that broadcasts across American streets in a big, loud, droning thing, the 5 calls to prayer. I don't think that'll happen. Um,
Well,
so,
it did.
but inside the mosque, well, of course,
Well, there's a small town, like a sub town within Detroit called Hamtramck. And when I was a kid, there was a big Polish town,
Uh-huh.
and it started to get more infiltrated. We'll use that term, or I'll use that term, by Islamic faiths. They start putting up the mosques or their their little tower, and then they blew the horn or whatever they blew. And so what happened was is that the Polish community decided, okay, because they were primarily Christian faith. I'm not sure if they
Catholics.
Catholics. Okay, so but they didn't put up with it, and they left. And so this seems to be a common theme. The same thing happened in Dearborn, Michigan. White collar. That was where the glass house for Ford Motor Company was. That was where the headquarters. Many people that worked for Ford at the plants, they had their middle class suburban home, in the 50s and the 60s in Dearborn. But right when Muslims were starting to move in, the these blue collar workers left, and they would, maybe went to Warren, Michigan, or someplace else. And so now you have Hamtramck and Dearborn as little enclaves of a caliphate, and you're starting to hear it in the news and how this is really changing the dynamics of the politics in the Detroit area.
Mm.
So there, you have these little spots that are starting to happen.
Yeah.
Then you look at what's happening in Europe with the massive migration and illegal immigration that's taking place, and how it's changing the structure of France, changing the structure of the
Britain.
UK or even Germany. So it's creating an instability in the population. So I think that's what Kirk was really focused on, is that because of the inflow and the actual magnitude of the flow,
Yeah.
it's leading to instability within the societies that,
However, at 32,
you know,
it's true. Europe civilization is in threat. The Goths have come over the Roman border and have decided not to assimilate. And whether that is a right or wrong thing, the practical reality is if you have millions of people coming into your country who are not there because they want to be Americans, but they want to be who they are and not change, not try to live with their neighbors, that's going to cause problems. But the way he said it, I mean, was what was wrong. His language was wrong. The other thing too, I would also say, and it is true what you're saying about Dearborn and Detroit, parts of Detroit. But I would say this, that the Muslim community is far more interacting with America than what I'm seeing in Paris and what I'm seeing from my contacts in Paris and in Germany and all. Um, uh, they're acting like the Goths. They're saying, "Oh, we're in Rome. Let's just exploit this place and be Goths." And we're not going to. What made Rome work is, at first the only Romans were in Latium, little itty bitty Latium, little property around the city of Rome. And I was mentioning the social wars. The social wars were a war where in central to southern provinces of Rome in the Italian peninsula, the war was that there were half of them were official Latium Romans. It had expanded to that. So they had Roman law protecting them. But the Italians, which were still Italians, did not. And that's why it was called a social civil war, the social wars, because they said, we want the same rights. We want also to have equal rights to you. Otherwise, it's an unfair society. And they went to civil war over it. And they actually won their rights. And eventually, all the Italians were equal Roman citizens and considered Roman. And then that expanded further from that point on. Much of the people who were citizens of Rome were not Latins. They adopted the Latin culture and the Latin language and also Greek as the language of commerce among Mediterranean nations. But there was a social contract that all people subscribed to in the Roman Empire until it began to fall apart. That made it last a long time first as a republic and later as the empire. And a vestige of that Eastern Roman Empire actually was another 1,000 years of Roman existence as the Byzantine civilization, which only was snuffed out finally when the Ottomans took Constantinople in 1453. So, from the 5th century to 1453, the vestiges of Roman ideas and basically the Eastern Roman Empire with a different name was still evolving because they were able to keep that social contract going. But it requires that people like, look, if I ended up in Russia, a little too old for that, but I would certainly like to visit it myself when this craziness is over. But if I went to live in any country, I would learn its language, I would learn its culture, I would learn how. In fact, I've done it. I've lived in India. I have lived in an India where muezzins are singing every morning and every night, and it wasn't a problem for me. I was like saying, "Whoa, our sannyasa religion here in our ashram here, we got muezzins that they're waking up the chickens at 3 a.m." I used to be a guard in Osho's garden, and I would hear the muezzins begin. Now, I happen to think it's a beautiful prayer, and the way they sing it is just chilling, and it's just like it's full of soul. So I love it. But maybe I'd have more difficulty with there was another guy who used to actually he was some Hindu nationalist, and or it was during the national elections, which take about 2.5 months for everybody to be counted because it's such a vast place. And I remember when that was going on, I lived through two of those. There's all these people with blowhorns and big blowing their amplifiers, and you're hearing and it was Marathi, and Marathi can sound really, as Osho used to say, I am not sure whether the Marathis are always having an argument. When they say they love it, it's like "Aber, aber." And it reminds me of the Germans, he said. The Germans always sound like they're having arguments. Ich liebe dich. I love you. Ich liebe dich. And so there, he said, so the Germans made all the German disciples laugh. So the Germans are kind of like the Marathis of Maharashtra, that we were living in the state of Maharashtra. And
Yeah.
another thing to study about the Russian Federation is how they have not stepped on the boundaries of people's religious freedom and have survived the test of time. For instance, the Chechen Civil War, which started where fundamentalist extremists took over Chechnya in the Caucasus Mountains, and this was right at the beginning of Putin Yeltsin was at the first Chechen War. Putin had to wrestle with the second Chechen War, and I mean these were bloody wars, no quarter, religious war. The Russians came in. The main capital was leveled in the fighting, but they lost a lot of people because the Chechens are great fighters. Chechens were losing a lot because their population is small. And there was some point where Vladimir Putin started to have dialogue with the father of the person who's the current head of Chechnya. And they said, we don't want to fight with you anymore. And we don't want to fight with you anymore. I said, well, let's find a way that we can live together. Because we've all lost too many people. And there were some terrible terrorist things like this whole school um, down in southern Russia, and it was on the day and around this time when everybody goes to school for the first time, and it's a celebration in Russia. It's like everybody gets dressed up, all the kids are in beautiful costumes and their clothes, and they go to school. Well, on that day, Beslan was the town. A team of Chechen terrorists went in and abducted the entire class of all the kids. And it was really hot day, and they had this person that was standing on a platform that had wires to all, everything was wired for blowing up. There were hundreds of kids, kindergartners, first, second graders, everything there, and their parents were outside. And it was finally there were some things happening where somebody was lighting off the bombs, and the Russians rushed in, and 400 children were killed. It was terrible. A kind of thing that's hard to forgive, but they did it. The Russians and the Chechens. How could the Chechens forgive the devastation of their decimation of their country, of their people? But they did. And now it's come full circle of 180 degrees. It's the Chechens right now are, their religion is respected. They rebuilt their city. It's called a federation because they're autonomous states. There are states that are just oblasts, provinces. They've got it worked out in the federation. Kazan is one of the most beautiful cities of Russia, and it is the center of the Caliphate during all the hundreds of years of struggle that Christians fought Ivan the Terrible with the Khanate. And Kazan is now that's where Putin held the BRICS conference last year. Or I guess it was, well, he held it there in recent times, and it was wonderful. There are 190 ethnic groups living in the 11 time zones of the Russian Federation. There are at least 40 different religions: Russian Orthodox, animists, tribalists in Siberia, Buddhist states, that Muslim states. Russia has got one of the largest Muslim populations in the Muslim Ummah, the community of Muslim believers. And what Putin has done, and his governments, has been remarkable example of how you can come out of hell and really live with your neighbors and have respect for everyone's freedom, even if you do, it's not your path. To have respect for everyone's freedoms. That's another thing I'd hit Charlie for. He would say some things that showed that he could he was a little like my faith is the right thing, and I can understand that. But
Well, I
one of the
saw.
ways to show your faith is to love thy neighbor as yourself, whether he's a Muslim in a muezzin minaret or not. There are ways that you can be like Mevlana Rumi, the great Sufi mystic, who was born in Afghanistan, whose family survived the first Muslim invasions of Genghis Khan, and they had to walk across the devastation of the Persian Empire, and their whole cities in Afghanistan were wiped out. And they ended up in Konya, Turkey. They felt the mountains were too mountainous for the horsemen to come. And so in Konya he lived, and it was a multi-religious, multi-ethnic trading city at the time. And even though clearly he was a Muslim and even more a Sufi, which is kind of a sect inside Muslim that Muslims try to tolerate, being a little different, but he was always relied upon if there was ever any dispute going on with different religious people, Christians, the Jews, in Konya, and Muslims, Sunnis and Shias, and all in Konya. They'd always ask him to be the dispenser, the person that would hold the meeting and suggest things for both sides, because they knew that, well, the man was filled in the love of his faith, and and he was a man, as some Christian mystics are, that doesn't tell you what to do. he teaches by example. Charlie, you're a young man, or you were. Um, if you had not been shot down, I think very much he would have found that wisdom. He would find more of the love rather than the preaching. And then he would have been like, Mevlana Rumi, the great Sufi whirler. I also,
I agree with you that I think that in time he would have been a little bit more
yeah,
wise rhetoric.
that's the tragedy of this.
Yeah.
It cut him off.
Well, and the thing is that I watched about an hour and a half of the funeral service today. And my observation was there's definitely a pendulum that's swinging from collectivism to individualism, away from liberalism towards conservatism.
Yeah.
But the thing is that this brand that he had, this turning point brand, is there is an evangelical aspect to
Mm.
it, right? And the wonders of the Constitution. This is me being a purist in the Constitution, but it's freedom of religion, but it's also freedom from religion.
Yes.
And this is something that I think he didn't have the wisdom yet to
He
obtain.
does not have yet.
And the followers and many of the people that were watching the funeral, I don't think they fully appreciate this. And I think also people in the cabinet for the president
Oh, yeah.
don't have this understanding that the Constitution is freedom of religion and from religion.
That's
So
right.
that basically means that it's not okay to keep on proselytizing, in mass and pulse it and assume that if people don't take it in, then they're wrong, because they're not wrong. I mean, they're holding their constitutional rights.
And that is
So there's
why
this,
this could become a
this
civil war.
yeah, yep. And I think that you're picking up on. I'm not sure how you got to that point, but picking up on Charlie Kirk and and um, and John Brown.
Yeah, well,
This
I don't know how I did it. It was like a vision, It was
well,
like,
our last episode, I was saying that there's rhymes with history. Remember? Well, Charlie, watch the way this works with the name. Charlie Kirk. Take the first two letters, C and K. All right. Now flip it. Kirk Charlie. All right.
okay.
All right. John Brown. All right. John Brown is the first. Brown, B.
Yeah.
Right. Charlie, C. It's the next letter. See,
Yeah.
when things rhyme, they're shifted. There's like a time shift, a word shift. There's a shift. Same thing with Kirk
Yeah.
and with John.
But
J
he's not
K
Charlie Brown,
J
at least.
no, right. But J K, a letter shift.
Ah,
And
ah.
then there was this, but the similarity is this preaching aspect.
Evangelical,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes. You're picking up on something definitely. And this war, this internal conflict that's happening in the United States.
Yeah, well, my brother was a Civil War reenactor, really. He actually ended up in the Armistead movie.
Oh,
In
wow.
the credits at the end when they show the two clashing.
Yeah.
Yeah, my brother's in that group. He's the one with the big guy with the black hat and the Confederate side.
Yeah.
I'll talk for sure talk to him when he comes to see me. Him and his wife come, and Linda come to see me when they're here. One time, because he's a writer as well, uh, and he's also studied ancient Greek. So he reads the book of Revelation in Greek. And um he I said, what was a big success, we hadn't had anything published yet, and I was saying, I think reason why I got a big success was that I was able to come to an overwritten subject like Nostradamus, and I found something, a new angle to redefine the whole way people look at it. And it was, well, it sold 800,000 copies in the United States, over millions in 9 languages, 9 countries, international bestseller. It was my Citizen Kane moment, and it's got me through the door ever since. Um, but I had this idea. I said, I have this idea, but I'm not really the guy to do this. It's actually not my journey to take, but it might be an interesting journey for you to take, Jim. Is There's one subject. It's really right out there in all Civil War topics, but no one's, as far as I know, has really done a look at it. And the question simply is this. It wasn't by accident that a lot of the generals on the North and the South all look like prophets, biblical prophets in gray or blue. They really were deeply religious in the North and the South. And the conundrum is, how can the same Christians, with their reading their Bibles, knowing their Bibles, interpret one half saying we can have slaves, and the other half saying we can't, and quoting scripture? It was a very religious based war, and that's why Brown making this rebellion, trying to make this rebellion to liberate the slaves, that went like wildfire through the North. The North really didn't have its heat in the game until that act of terrorism. And then Brown was very prophetic. He said, "This is the beginning of something. And yeah, you can hang me, but this is just the beginning. It's going to be a religious war, you know." And hopefully the righteous shall be victorious, and the slave will be free. Um, and I said, well,
I mean, would you consider,
that's your book to write, because you know your biblical scriptures much better than me. But I'm wondering, I said, it'll be a challenge also for you to do it, because you might learn a deeper view of Christianity from it, because you're going to have to be objective about, you're going to have to see the Confederate side of it as well as the Union side of it, which is ironic. I said, if I ever had a choice to be a reenactor, I told Jim, I said, if I had a choice, you went to the Confederates, I would never be a Confederate. I would have to be a Union. I would wear the Union uniform. So here's brother against brother in the theatrical Civil War.
and that happened a lot, actually. That happened a lot in the Civil War.
Even more so in this very Civil War-like war that Russia's fighting with Ukraine. Far more so. It's a real tragic story that Ukrainians and Russians have lived together for so long that everybody's got family on both sides of this. It's the biggest tragedy that no one hardly talks about. They do in Russia and Ukraine, but no one outside of Ukraine understands this. It's worse than I think any civil war I can imagine.
All right, if we take the premise that history is with rhymes.
Mm. It
So
does rhyme.
The Civil War happened between 1861 to 1864.
65.
65.
April
So
65.
yeah.
June actually officially started.
All right. So what was happening in Europe at that time period in terms of war?
Oh, they were, the 1860s were considered one of the most violent, a lot of little wars all over the world, Civil War being the biggest. But um, wow, it's a big question. Let's see, there's a lot of complexities to this.
So I'm trying to make a parallel between what's going on with Ukraine and potentially what may be heating up in the United States.
Well, the Civil War that's going on because it is in its heart a civil war. There's a different factor. There's a whole lot of Ukrainians that actually don't want to be fighting. I mean, everybody in the South we're gonna. I mean, Shelby Foote made a very clear statement. One of the great guys who wrote about the Civil War, and I much admire him as a writer. And he said he's from Alabama, and he was saying in the documentary, he said, you know, if I were living there, and as much as I hate slavery and ride against it as a deep South Southern boy, I just can't imagine fighting against my own people. Just like Lee. He said, I think I would have to stand up with my people in Alabama, even though I disagree with just about everything they stand for in this war. And there were a lot of Confederates that did that. They were fighting for Alabama. They weren't fighting for. There was a great line in the Gettysburg movie, that Ted Turner, one of his this trilogy that he was trying to do. He didn't get the last part, Gods and Generals, Gettysburg, and then too bad they didn't do the final one. That would have been amazing because it would have ended in Appomattox. And there's this great scene after the first day of battle, the Chamberlain and his brother, uh, Chamberlain, who became the hero, Little Round Top, that later that day. On the morning, they ended up talking to some captive Southern guys, and because we're all Americans, it was just had an intimacy. This happens with the Ukrainians and Russians in this battle, and they say when they're not fighting, they say, well, he said, well, uh, I never came here to fight over a count of darkies. I was fighting for states' rights. I had nothing to do with that. This is about my right to secede from the Union or not. It's like, and that was a big deal. And, vast majority of white sharecropping and Southerners they could only dream of being plantation owners. Um, but he said, I sure can't say that I'm fighting this world for a bunch of darkies, like over that issue. It's about states' rights.
It's interesting you bring this up because I saw a book signing from, I don't know, it's like the great great grandson of Teddy Roosevelt, right?
Mm.
Whatever. Maybe I'm missing one great there, but he is a professor at Yale, and he wrote this book. He presented it at the club, and his premise of the book was exactly what you were saying. The Civil War was predicated on this idea of the ability to secede from the Union, and he was
Yeah.
basically saying that really that the Union didn't align with what the founding fathers really were all about, and that actually the Confederacy was more tied with the founding
Yeah.
fathers.
Well, by accident, he probably quoted a lot of the passages that I quoted in alt right, alt left. The Beyond that book. I have a whole chapter quoting because I'd get all these Southern people saying, "Oh, it was always about states' rights and never about any of that stuff." And it's true, it was, but there's one clause that made that a problem. And that was the real conundrum because this is the Declaration of Independence that was done in South Carolina and Columbus, and it became the declaration for all the states. And they laid out their argument, and frankly, legally, they were right. And yes, it clearly shows that the South was more true to the states' right freedom. And by the way, we wouldn't have won the Revolutionary Wars without Virginia, Georgia, and Carolinas. Um, so it was this long problem and of course the founding fathers, Jefferson's a Virginian, he had Washington's Virginia, he had slaves, but they were smart enough to say, let us deal with that problem not now, but when we are a nation, a union of states and sea. And they tried. And even Lee said, we tried every way to resolve this issue, and the only thing was left was to let God decide on the battlefield. And when the Confederacy ended and it was defeated, Lee was a major figure in healing the nation. He basically said, and they loved him in the South. He was a very beloved man. And he said, no, let's not fight. We gave it to God to judge on the battlefield of truth, and we lost. So let us rejoin the Union and become part of it again. And God, it could have ended up really like some balkanized, ugly thing that happens in Europe, and then keeps going for centuries. But we did something amazing. And also, what happened at Appomattox was amazing, that we had a man like Ulysses S. Grant facing a man like Robert E. Lee, two really giants on wrong sides of, in their view, of the other. But, you know, Grant had not known, he was not prepared when Leaf was coming, and he was having a migraine, really bad migraine. He has grand mal. Thank God I don't. Um, and so he apologized for being in his riding clothes. And he's just, I had to get here as fast as I could to talk to you. And of course, Lee was in his dress, he looked regal and marvelous. And so he apologized, and mud on his boots and all that. I said, I'm sorry that I'm not in the proper attire, but I just found out and rode 10 miles. And so, and so and the fact that, because he used to talk to Lincoln about this, and actually there's some good scenes in Spielberg's Lincoln where Grant and Lincoln towards the end are talking about how he said, and Lincoln, and he's the only actor that gets his voice right. It's high pitched. Well, I never wanted to punish the Southern people. They're our people. And and so, listening to Lincoln just a few days before he was shot, uh, I think Appomattox happened. I think he missed Appomattox. I'm not sure about that. That was April 14th when Appomattox was courthouse signing of Army of Northern Virginia surrendered. It really didn't end the war, but it was pretty much ended. It took till June before it just wound down quietly. Um, he he said, "Look, all of your men will need their guns to hunt, and you'll need your horses too, so that you can make crops. So I'm just as long as you are furloughed, not to go to the war again, your soldiers can go home, and if they have horses, they can take them home. And if they want to take their weapons so that they can hunt and get food for the family, fine." And Lee said, he was surprised. He said, "These are very generous terms." And it's really, I think every American should read that, because of the interchange between them. And then also, when he said goodbye outside in front of the courthouse and Lee got on his horse, before he did it, Lee walked out, and with his beautiful gloved hands, which he just put his gloves back on, and he was looking with his hands. And he was like going, it was so hard. What a gentleman, what an amazing man. It was a very painful thing for him to do, but there's truly a man of honor. Um, there's not enough praise in this country about honor, and not one-sided honor, but the honor to the gracefulness. If you have to fight somebody and you beat him, you reach down with your hand and pull him up. This respect for humanity. And, you know, it was we've lost our way as a country. We've lost that. We've lost it in our schools. We lost it in our social studies classes. I was at the tail end when you got that kind of education, where even in high school they were teaching you how to critically think. Like I've said before, where if there was something to be debated, and if all the people, oh, I want to do that side, and then the teacher would say, oh, and then the other, okay, what do you, yeah, we'll do, I want that side. I said, okay, all of you wanted this side, you're going to debate for the other side, and vice versa, you know. And because this is not about being on the right side, it's being on a side so you can get to understand what both sides are about. And And you can just learn to be in the other person's shoes. So important. Literally, humanity's future depends on that, especially with nuclear powers. China and Russia, I'm not afraid of. I do not lose sleep over them going crazy and launching World War III, but I can't say that about my own nation because we have dumbed ourselves down. We have people in, we have a president that chooses people that are more stupid than he is, but if, with a few surprises that are not so, but he's not listening to them. He's isolating them like Gabbard. And Bobby, fortunately, is far enough away. Bobby Kennedy Jr. is far enough away in his own place that he's not directly involved with the intrigues of politics and global issues. He's really dealing with a domestic issue. And by the way, notice how little news is talking about what he's doing?
Mhm.
He's doing amazing things.
Mhm.
He's truly reforming. He's truly setting the stage for a healthier America down the next few generations. So he is, there's some good in this, and maybe Trump will have a last burst of intelligence for a couple more years. I don't know, but
Well, supposedly he's supposed to announce something tomorrow. Trump's supposed to announce something about autism tomorrow, the causes of autism.
like his autism or
No,
autism in
not
general.
his autism.
Yeah. Oh, well, the kissy. Well, yes, he's finally got his report. He's probably, he's probably, that's bad on me. Sorry, Donald. That's my fault. That's my bad. Um,
So it's going to rock the whole big
oh,
pharma industry when
well,
he makes a statement.
remember when Jim Carrey's wife, the actress, got burned left, right, and center for saying, "I think my kid got weird after he took all that cocktail of vaccines." Well, guess what? She was right.
Mhm.
And you can't have these levels of autism and obesity so yeah, he's working on that. That yeah, it's going to shock. That's going to be a shocker, but that's a good shock.
Hmm. Hmm.
Very.
No, I'm actually relatively happy that it's progressing. I think it's progressing a little bit slower than I expected. I thought it would be moving quicker, but I'm sure there's a lot of infighting that's going on at the CDC, FDA.
I would say, well, it's not getting a lot of reporting because the press doesn't even want to know about it. But from my sources, I got some of his some sources, and it it's actually probably making more progress than anything else that's happening in the Trump administration. As slow and steady. None of this razzmatazz showbiz stuff like Doge. I mean, all Doge did was streamline the State Department and make it even more vicious. Without the USAID being a burden, now they can just go direct and do the same stuff that they're
You're bringing
doing in
up a
other
good
countries.
point. You're bringing up a good point because you know, I'm a big fan of what's the goal, fix it, and then verify it's been fixed. Some sort of monitoring mechanism.
Yep.
Trump's style, at least the way he is communicating to the public about what he's doing in his administration, I don't think there's enough confirmation through a monitoring system that what he said he was going to do or is doing is being done. Like for example, what's the complete? Is it 40% completed? What's the stats? In terms of how many people that have been deported, or how much crime in the 40 biggest cities in the United States. How's it going down or how's it going up?
No, that's a
And so
good
he's
point.
he's there's not enough monitoring of his policies. Then you take it one step further, where his administration is pushing for publicly traded companies to not report as many times during the year. Instead of reporting quarterly, he's saying to report semi-annually. And I was like, well, wait a minute. If you're an investor and you want to know what's going on in the company, you don't want to know what's going on in the company every 6 months. You want to know every 3 months.
It's a chaos, and he also has no idea that the First Amendment, variation on your theme about religion, um, it supports good speech, and it supports, like, if it supports religion, and it also is supports no religion.
Right, right,
Well, in equal ways, it supports what you think is good speech and bad.
right.
The right to, I think there was even a Supreme Court thing that, like, went to the old trope, or the old thing people always come up with, and saying the guy yelling fire in a theater. Um, um, the that he misused his speech to hurt people, that will definitely get him into jail and prison or manslaughter, all of that. But um, even the Supreme Court had to say, well, yeah, he had the right to freely speak like an idiot, and he's going to pay for it. Do something hardly anyone would do. And so they agreed that that was even free speech. But it was, the issue then was not that he had freely spoken, that he was some kind of psychopath doing something that would cause danger. Yes, he had the freedom to yell fire, but that was a very unwise thing, similar to what happened to the ABC night host. First I looked at what he said, and I thought, it's not good. But then I slept on it and said, you know what? What what uh what what that guy said, I can't think of his name at the moment.
Kimmel, Kimmel.
Jimmy Kimmel. What he said was stupid and dumb, but he had a right to say it. He didn't really say something. He didn't say, well, I'm glad, we should kill more people like Charlie, or he didn't do that. So even according to the rules of, and frankly, it wasn't even the rules of his contract that he was breaching. What it was Donald Trump threatening to say, look, you already lost 12 million on a defamation case on me with the Kamala Harris interview. He called the guy up and said, I'm going to shut you down. So where's his legal right in free speech and First Amendment? He was not. Shall we impeach Mr. Trump for doing that? I mean, he was not right to say what he said and act like he's not. We didn't vote in a mafia boss who'll make an offer you can't refuse and put a horse head in your bed. Sometimes he's, and I did in my Godfather report from the last thing, and he's even perpetuating it. Those pictures of him in the mafia pictures that I had in that, of him being Don Corleone and saying Fafo when he's got the hat and he's looking like a mafia don, he posted those on Truth Social.
At times I wish Trump would seem a little bit more presidential. Like if you compare him to Reagan, yeah, he was tough with the Russians, and
Yeah,
he was about that he was a conservative and all this, but there was a certain level of respect for
yeah.
the office. I just don't see that Trump is respectful to the office through his lack of etiquette. I mean,
He
there's
doesn't know what the office is. He's just going to do the Trump show. He's going to do Celebrity Apprentice. And now he's the apprentice president in his second season of 4 years. And he's got another bunch of, you hired or you're fired bunch that are all around him. Some have been hired to other things, some of them have been fired, some of them have taken up too much power, like Rubio, who's now the central he's the, like, chief spy observer, and now he's also Secretary of State. I don't Again, the Congress is also showing its illiteracy, and the courts. Congress should say, look, let us pick another guy. This is not good. This is not, having this guy being these two very important security issue leaders of the cabinet is not constitutional. Now, the court has been throwing out his tariffs, and slowly, the court is showing its stress tests. But of course, it's a slow and lumbersome problem, and he's daily throwing out stuff that needs to be constitutionally examined. So in a way, the court, Supreme Court, both sides of it are trying their best to give us okay, how much are you getting right or wrong legally? And most of it's wrong. Although they did favor him on things that were absolutely wrong. When these court appellate judges in any place in the country could shut down the executive branch. I mean, God, did these guys go to law school? I didn't go to law school. I know that's unconstitutional. And it took like how many months for it to finally get up to the Supreme Court? I would like to see the Supreme Court make it more efficient
Mhm.
and work a little harder than they are and make it. Now, I'm not saying cut corners. In fact, I would say if I were to investigate it and be the person to help it, if I had that job, my first job would to be go in and see how is this working? Are there things that they're doing that worked in a slower paced history time in our country? And can they do the same job um, with certain technologies speeding it up? As far as I'm concerned, in my own work, I once in a while I talk about it in this update of my Nostradamus work. I said back in the I'll say this quatrain here, it looked very interesting, but I was living in the world of libraries and book dust and hurt hands from flipping pages 15 hours a day and only doing literally work on 4 hours. And I had not, I didn't, I had 18 months to get the whole thing together. So I had to say, well, I can't do anything with this one. Now, all these years later, I come across that same quatrain and its mystery. And now I'm in the world of internet and interconnectivity. It took me 5 minutes
Right.
to
Right.
do. So I thought, I've got to write about this. It's got to be part of my interpretation. And so every once in a while I do that where I said, I didn't have access to the information like I have now. So one thing that's wonderful about this time is if you're not a robot, if you've had a good education, if you've learned how to critically think, you can use, you now have tools that I could only dream of in the mid 90s. And you also can use algorithms to open the world rather than let the algorithms let you sleepwalk into a magnification of your ego. And only the people that agree with you are talking to you. And you're becoming, and it's no wonder that these kids growing up in that world are having meltdowns and can't answer questions. That poor guy that was saying, what have I said that's racist?
I think you're hitting on something that's kind of important here. So we have more of a conservative SCOTUS,
Hmm.
but the thing is that their legal aids are of a younger generation,
Yes.
and and that younger generation's critical thinking skills, even though that they went through law school, aren't as great as the ones that are on the bench.
Yeah, there are.
And also, even if they're hiring, let's say for a conservative judge, conservative legal clerks, and for a liberal judge, liberal clerks, they're probably not really aligned because of the difference in generation. And so there may be slow walking. The clerks may be slow walking some of this or preventing a real dialogue, with the different justices. I I because there was a hint of of proof of what I'm saying here when it came to Roe versus Wade's overthrow,
Yes.
overthrow,
That should have happened
reversal,
decades ago
the term.
because the procedure was wrong. It's like, duh. It was, but, I'm not supporting abortion. I'm simply saying that it was on the technicalities of the way it was passed through was not really a proper hearing. And that's important. If
And
it isn't important, then you live in a banana republic.
There's also with Roberts, there's a tendency to kind of like just pass it down and not really make a true decision. And I feel as he's compromised. Why he's compromised, I don't know. I don't have any proof
I
on it. But
think he's mostly compromised by that he's thinking more about his legacy than his job. And I think he's been that way a long time. And he will compromise because he doesn't want this on his watch.
yeah, maybe it could be.
I've seen it a lot. I mean, I would say it's a bit of an ego trip on his
Yeah,
part that he,
he's kicking the can down the road for another chief justice to make the
yeah,
call
that's
when
right.
it worse. And
Yeah,
I don't feel like he's doing his job.
no, he isn't. And he is, I mean, I've noticed a lot of times he will kick it down because he's going to leave it for somebody else. Frankly, this is what Angela Merkel did all the time she was running Germany. She destroyed German politics, absolutely destroyed it. Alexander Macurison is right about that on the Duran. She made sure that she had no people to kick her out of her job for decades by moving mediocrities who have no limits against people have limits and have measured ways of looking because she wanted to run the show. So when she retired, she left the German government uh, to pygmies. And this is the government of Bismarck. You know, talk about a giant in politics, Otto von Bismarck. Um, I'm a little jealous of Wagner. He met him. He came to the Bayreuth Festspiel House, to see the operas when it was finally built. And the Kaiser, the one with the kind of the long mutton chop thing, um, he came up to him because I just found out they knew each other. Actually, they had had a cordial relationship when he was a young man. And he said, "Well, Herr Wagner, you did it. I didn't believe that you'd make it." And he said, "I didn't either." So they came there. And anyway, that's a side story. I was have my Wagnerian tangents, but the uh yeah, I think that the courts could it would be a very good thing for the courts to go through some kind of let's just sit down and see if without losing the letter of our work, can we bring it a little more into the times that needs it and not go slow like it's the 19th century?
Yeah.
I
And
think
with
there's
modern
a need for it.
technology, I think they can do that, and there needs to be a shift. But the, the way I'm seeing the judicial branches is that they're slow walking everything and not willing to take a stance.
Yeah,
We have the legislative branch that's constantly in infighting, and they can't
yeah.
reach a consensus. And
Two-party
we have
system.
and we have right now a executive branch that is running roughshod, and
Yeah,
with very little
let's
etiquette.
improvise everything
Yeah, very little etiquette.
and
Now,
blame it on everybody else.
I did vote for Trump, all three times. But the thing is that I wish that he would be a little bit more presidential. But that's the problem, that the reason why people voted for Trump was because he's not presidential.
Yeah, but
That's the paradox.
well, well, here's the thing too about that. I do think more about who's keeping score and what things are actually getting passed and what aren't. I think the MAGA people that are like Tucker Carlson and others, and you could call yourself you voted for him, so it's a kind of in a way of, well, we're taking a chance with this.
Right.
And I do think, the people that are stand by your man Gaga they're not relevant to this. All those young Democrats that voted for him is very important, and all those people, the young people want something better than what's been going on for the last couple of generations. It's definitely that's there. He channeled that. He's a very good campaigner, but a genius actually in the way he instinctively gets around people and gets there. But when he's there, he's not a he knows how to be a candidate, but he hasn't yet learned how to be a president. And that requires a little education. That requires that you actually read McKinley's book about TARPs. I know he never read it because
Oh, he's
it
not.
doesn't say that in his book.
He doesn't. He doesn't read. He's an instinctual street
But do you know
street
how
smart
I would
guy.
counter that? Because I'd sit him in front of the TV to watch really good documentaries. He says, "No, you don't have to read. Just watch this. Just look at this. Look at this background about how Russia is. Look how the country came through this." I think he's a kid, so let him watch the TV. I learned a lot from watching TV.
Well, I mean that I can see that happening. I mean, he's probably a visual guy.
He's a visual guy.
He's a visual guy, and
Yeah.
in the action.
Movement, visual,
Yeah,
movie. That's him. And
yeah.
so I would there again, it's like, okay, let's make sure the president actually looks at some really good, interesting, entertaining, but informative documentaries on how the Supreme Court works or how the Constitution works. And yeah, and yeah, it bores him otherwise. We got to deal with the 8-year-old. Truth is that which works. And if people want to ignore the 8-year-old and think they can fix it, that doesn't work. So, yes, I've always, appealed to his positive sides as much as I can, and in writing about him as astrologically, he has a full spectrum chart. It's all there: the good, the bad, the ugly, and the transcendental.
Well,
Uber Gemini, multiple Gemini.
we're getting to that time of the night. I want to just remind the audience that in the description, the links will take you to John's website. So please click those links and take a look at the periodical and sign up for a reading. John, before we go, maybe you can quickly explain the periodicals that they can sign up for and the readings.
Yes, I try to do monthly a Hogue prophecy report. It is I send it in a PDF file to your email, which is a way to keep my freedom of speech alive, and so I can speak freely to you. And I am a futurist who looks at future trends. I have over an 80% track record of accuracy, 100% for picking the presidents of the United States since 1968. I'm 15-0 now with the Trump election. Um, so I look at a lot of things in the world, and I have had a unique take in the world. I've lived in a lot of the places I look at, and I'm an American that lived abroad, and I would say that I would say it'd be a part of some gift in education, that one of the steps of education would be that you live 6 months in another country, and not in a hotel in an American quarter, but in the country. And I mean, in a way that was kind of what the the Peace Corps was training a lot of people to see, going out and helping people and seeing. It's so important for Americans. Americans will be better isolationists if they really knew what the outside world was really about. I think it would make them even better isolationists. If you don't know much about the world, but you think you can walk into other people's countries and tell them, order them about according to your isolationist view, it's amazing it lasted as long as it did. It only did because there was not another alternative. Well, now there is. The BRICS and the SMO and SCO and all of that. And so it's Americans have a great opportunity in this difficult rebirthing of our nation to kind of come home and come back to being Americans and being and by actually learning what's really going on outside of your country, you will really be able to compare yourself to the world and what's going on. So that's just one example of things that I write about that you really will not find anywhere else, that are just unique to what my takes are about the world, and it has also a prophetic angle to it. And it's also fully illustrated, and there's often a lot of jokes in it too. I mean, when times are hard, if you can't laugh at doomsday, what can you laugh at? So, so I make some funnies in there too. It's important to be sincere, not serious. Osho used to say to us, seriousness is a dis-ease, and the word dis-ease comes from the phrase dis-ease, being uneasy, being not in your center, uh, not eating the right way, not thinking, not having your thinking capacities challenged to be critical. Um, and so, yeah, so these are some of the things and many other things to talk about. There's a lot of history, a lot of knowledge, a lot of people who write me back and review what I do, and they say they're deeply touched by the backstory that I give, the historical foundations to things that kind of describe from the past where they're going into the future. And so it is the way I can make this all work financially. Um, and if you, it would be a great help if you would uh, then and also be given back so much from me that you either do an automatic payment for $5 a month, or you do the whole $60 donation in one payment per year. And you can also, if you want to sample them, if you say, current, you can do the $5 or a little more just to read the current one that's out, all the articles, not just the sample articles. And I have some people that do just choose by the month when they want to go out and buy one, which is great too. And so that's there. And the other thing too is that as you've seen me before this screen, in these shows, you can see me just like this, one-on-one with you doing astrology readings that go into tarot and our basic transmedium reading. So I have those aspects in it. They tend to last, they can last 2.5 hours at sometimes. I do it, I make the schedule, I only do one reading when there's a reading a day, and I make the schedule such that I can go as long as is needed. And so it's not just a little quick reading. It's like the time flies with these readings, actually. It's amazing the space we get in, disappears. And then suddenly it's like 3 hours. Just like now, if you've been watching this show here, we are at exactly at 2.5 hours. And I imagine for a lot of you, it's felt a lot shorter than that. So there's a kind of vibe that comes out of my readings or my meetings with you in this form or in a private reading. That is part of the magic of these readings. And so what you'll do is you go to hogueprophecy.com. That's where my free samples are for my articles. I usually have one and a half or one if it's a large article, completely free. And then I have long excerpts for the others that the subscribers get. And then there's a little thing when it breaks for the pay, and I show the subscribers examples. There's places right there where you can join right at the front of the each article. You'll see a green eye looking up, and a very beautiful green eye with a whole bunch of greenery in it. And and then you can donate, you can subscribe there as well. And then you can as far as that's for the Hogue Prophecy reports, but for at the very top of the long paragraph of themes, right at the bottom of that is the um, have a Hogue reading. do a Hogue reading, and it's in red. And then there's an email. You click on that email. All you have to do to speed me to see it and then get back to you and tell you about how the reading's paid for and how much it is and all that is just write in the subject line Hogue reading, HOGUE reading. And I get hundreds and hundreds of emails every day because I have it set up to be pretty wide open, so I don't have any robots. I get a lot of spam, but I don't miss the important messages either that they spam out without my knowing. So that's how I'll see your point. If it's just a simple subject line Hogue reading, and I'll get right back to you as soon as I can see it. And mostly I'm very fast at it. So I hope to have you be a reader. I hope to have you do a reading. If you had a reading in the past and it's been a while, I certainly we can do one again. And thank you for listening to us and spending your precious lifetime. Time in life is precious, and you spent this much with us. I'm deeply grateful, and I love you.
Well, everyone, make sure you click that link, go to John's website and help out, get those periodicals and do a reading. John, thank you again for a great show, and we'll do this again soon.
Yes.
So everybody, thank you for joining. I greatly appreciate it. John,
Thank you, everybody.
You want to say goodbye to everybody here?
Goodbye, everybody.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Over and out.